Silence in that courtroom was the kind that has weight. I felt it press against my chest as I walked through the double doors, my heels clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm I'd learned to control years ago. Steady. Even. Never rushed. My mother used to say I walked like I was afraid to take up space. She wasn't wrong, back then. That morning, I'd gotten a text from my brother. "Don't embarrass the family today," that was it. No punctuation, no context, just that. I slipped my phone into my blazer pocket and pushed open the door to Courtroom 14. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the parts that came before, the years that built the person standing in those heels. I grew up in Decatur, Georgia, second of 3 kids. My older brother had always been the golden one, the one my parents bragged about at church, the one whose report card went on the fridge while mine went into a drawer. He played football in high school, got a partial scholarship to Georgia State, and spent the better part of his 20s telling anyone who'd listen that he was this close to making something big happen. The big thing never came, but the telling never stopped. My younger sister was the baby. You know how it goes. And me? I was the one who read books instead of going to parties. The one who got a full scholarship to Emory and then, unforgivably, apparently, actually used it. I put myself through law school at Georgetown on loans and a part-time job transcribing depositions. 3 years of sleeping 6 hours a night if I was lucky. 3 years of ramen and instant coffee, and the particular loneliness of studying while everyone else was living. My mother never came to my law school graduation. She said it was too far to drive. Washington to Atlanta is a 10-hour drive. She'd made that drive twice in the years before. Once for my brother's college orientation, once for a cousin's wedding. I told myself it didn't matter. I got good at telling myself things didn't matter. When I passed the bar my first try, I called home. My dad picked up. He said, "That's nice, honey," and then asked if I was dating anyone. My brother was in the background. I heard him laugh at something on TV. My mother took the phone and said, "Are you eating enough?" I moved back to Atlanta 2 years later, took a position at a mid-sized firm downtown, and for a while I thought proximity might fix something that geography never could. It didn't. But I told myself I was there because the work was good, and that was true enough to hold on to. The first time my brother brought Kylie home for Sunday dinner, my mother made her cornbread from scratch. I want you to understand that my mother had not made cornbread from scratch in years. We'd been eating the Jiffy box mix since I was in middle school. But there it was. Cast iron skillet, real buttermilk, the whole thing. She'd gotten up early to do it. Kylie was pretty and soft-spoken and thought my brother was brilliant. My mother loved her immediately and without reservation, the way she'd never quite loved me, without condition, without the slow cataloging of my failures disguised as concern. At dinner, my brother mentioned, casually, that Kylie's family had connections at a car dealership and he was thinking about getting into sales. "That's where the real money is," he said. My dad nodded like my brother had said something wise. I'd just made junior associate at the firm. Nobody asked about it. I ate my cornbread and I smiled and I cleared the table when dinner was done. The case that changed everything started, like most important things do, with a phone call I almost didn't answer. It was a Thursday evening in late October. I was still at my desk. I was always still at my desk, working through the exhibits for a commercial dispute that had been grinding through discovery for 8 months. My phone buzzed. Unknown Georgia number. I picked up. The man on the other end introduced himself as Hector Villanueva, and he said he'd been referred to me by a former client of mine named Dwight Booker. Dwight had been a small business owner I'd helped 2 years prior get out of a predatory franchise agreement. One of those cases where you work twice as hard for a fraction of the billing rate because the client genuinely cannot afford full freight, and the injustice is real and specific, and it keeps you up at night. Hector said he was part of a group of homeowners, 43 families across Clayton and Henry counties, who had been sold mortgages through a broker network later found to have falsified income documentation. The original lender had since sold the loans to a larger servicer. Families had been paying inflated rates for 3 years. Some were already in foreclosure proceedings. We went to 2 other firms, he said. They said the case was too complex for the potential recovery, that the class wasn't large enough to justify the resource investment. I asked him to send me what he had. He sent me 400 pages of documents over the next 2 days. I read every one of them. By the end of that weekend, I knew 3 things. The case was complicated. The math was genuinely difficult to make work at a standard contingency, and 43 families were going to lose their homes if someone didn't figure out how to make it work anyway. I tipped the case. My brother found out about it at Thanksgiving. I don't know how, exactly. I hadn't told my parents the details, just that I was working on something significant. But he'd apparently done some Googling. He had that particular energy he gets when he thinks he's found something to use, slightly too relaxed, eyes a little too bright. 43 clients, he said, passing the sweet potato casserole. That's not that many, is it? What's the average house worth down there, like $250? I said the case wasn't primarily about property value. Right, but I mean, what do you actually make on something like that? Is this even worth your time? My dad looked up from his plate. He had a way of listening to my brother that he'd never quite applied to me. Leaning in, like whatever came next might be important. I said the case was worth my time because it was the right case to take. My brother smiled. Not meanly. That was almost worse. The smile wasn't malicious, it was just absent of any genuine curiosity about who I was or what I did. Sure, he said, but you gotta eat. Kylie patted his arm. My mother asked if anyone wanted more green beans. I drove home that night and sat in my driveway for 10 minutes before going inside. I had a brief due in 4 days. I had 43 families counting on me to find a path through a legal structure designed to make exactly that path invisible. And I was sitting in my driveway in the dark, 31 years old, still trying to make peace with the fact that my own family had never once asked a real question about my life. I went inside. I made tea. I opened my laptop. I got back to work. The case took 14 months. I want to compress that for you. I want to skip past the depositions that ran 6 hours and produced nothing, the motions that got denied and then reconsidered and then denied again, the Saturdays I worked until 2 in the morning and then walked to the all-night diner 3 blocks from my apartment and ate scrambled eggs alone at a corner table because I needed to sit somewhere with other people even if I didn't know any of them. I won't compress it though, because those 14 months are the story. The key break came from a paralegal on our team named Simone, who noticed a pattern in the loan origination timestamps that nobody else had flagged, a clustering that suggested the income documentation wasn't just falsified on individual files, but processed in batches. That meant the broker network had a systematic operation, not a handful of rogue actors. That changed the liability picture significantly. It also meant we needed an expert witness who could testify to the batch processing pattern in terms a jury could understand. I found her in a financial forensics professor at UGA who'd spent 12 years as a bank examiner before going academic. Her name was Dr. Whitfield. She was 71 years old, and she had absolutely no patience for anyone who tried to make numbers sound more complicated than they were. She was the best witness I'd ever worked with. By the time we entered mediation, we had a case. A real one. The servicer settled for $4.2 million. 43 families received payment. 21 of the foreclosure proceedings were halted. 11 families who had already lost their homes received compensation that, in most cases, covered their down payments and the inflated interest they'd paid. It was not a perfect outcome. It never is. But it was something real, something that changed the specific material circumstances of specific real people, and that, I'd learned, is what the work actually is. The day the settlement was finalized, I drove to my parents' house. I hadn't planned to. I was going to go home, order Thai food, call my college roommate Teresa, maybe open the bottle of wine I'd been saving for an occasion that felt worthy. But I found myself on I-20, heading south, and then I was in their driveway and the lights were on in the kitchen, and I thought, I just wanted them to know. That's the thing about family. Even after everything, there's still that moment. That small, stubborn wanting. My mother answered the door. She looked surprised. Is everything okay? I said yes. I had good news actually. I told her about the settlement. 4.2 million, 43 families. I told her it had taken 14 months and that I'd had to rebuild the legal theory twice and that there were nights I wasn't sure we were going to get there. She listened. She nodded. And then she said, "That's wonderful, honey. Are you hungry? Your brother's here. He just got a promotion." Assistant manager at the dealership. My brother appeared in the hallway behind her. He was grinning. Yeah, I'm basically running the financing desk now. He leaned against the door frame. 4 million's pretty good, right? What's your cut? I looked at him. I looked at my mother. I said, it's a contingency case. The fee structure is different. Which was true and also completely beside the point. My mother said, I'll make you a plate. I stood in the kitchen while she reheated leftovers, and my brother told me about a truck he was thinking of buying with his first bonus. I ate standing up. I drove home. I called Teresa. I opened the wine. And somewhere between the first glass and the second, something shifted in me. Not dramatically. Not all at once. It was quieter than that, like a door I'd been holding half open for years finally, gently swinging shut. I wasn't angry, I want to be clear about that. I wasn't even sad exactly. I was just done carrying the weight of their opinion of me as though it were the authoritative verdict on my worth. I had worked for 14 months on something genuinely hard and genuinely meaningful. And I'd won, and I was sitting alone with wine that I'd poured for myself in an apartment I'd chosen, and I was 32 years old and alive in my own life. That was enough. It was more than enough. The call came 8 months later. My brother's voice was different on the phone. Flatter. Faster. He'd co-signed on a lease agreement for a business venture that had gone sideways. The other party was threatening litigation. He needed advice. He needed it, he said, urgently. I asked him to tell me the specifics. He did. It took him a while because the specifics were not simple. He'd signed documents he hadn't read carefully, in a hurry, because the other party was a friend and he hadn't thought he needed to. It was not, on the surface, a sympathetic fact pattern. I asked him if he'd talked to anyone else about it. He said he'd called a guy he knew who'd done some real estate stuff. The guy had told him it was basically hopeless. He called another number from the internet and gotten a free consultation that amounted to someone telling him it would cost $12,000 up front to take on. I was quiet for a moment. He said, look, I know we haven't always, I know things have been. He didn't finish the sentence. My brother has never been good at finishing sentences that require him to say something true about himself. I said, send me the documents. He sent them that evening. I looked at them that night. The situation was not hopeless. There were several angles, actually, and the strongest of them hinged on a notice provision in the lease agreement that the other party had technically failed to comply with. It wasn't a slam dunk, but it was something real. I called him back the next morning. You have options, I told him. Here's what I see. I walked him through it, all of it. The notice provision, the response timeline, what documentation he'd need to pull together, what the realistic range of outcomes looked like. He was quiet the whole time. When I finished, he said, you know all this. I said, I've been doing this for 7 years. Another silence, and then, I should have paid more attention to what you do. I'm sorry. 7 words. My brother is not built for apology. The architecture isn't quite right. But those 7 words were real, and I knew it, and I let them be real without making him repeat them. Send me the rest of the file, I said. I'll figure out what we need. I am not going to tell you that everything changed after that. Life is not built that way. My mother still brags about my brother more than she brags about me. My dad still has his particular way of listening to him that he's never quite managed with me. These things are what they are, and I've made a kind of peace with that. Not the peace of resignation, but the peace of a woman who knows what she's built and doesn't need anyone else to hand her the deed. What I will tell you is this. Last spring, I was asked to speak at a luncheon for first-generation law students at Emory. The woman who introduced me had pulled my bio from the firm's website. She read it out to the room, the degrees, the cases, the work. Sitting in that audience was a 24-year-old from Macon, who had just been accepted to Emory Law on a full scholarship. She came up to me afterward. She said she'd grown up being told she was the quiet one in her family, the one who read too much, the one nobody quite understood. I said, I know exactly who that is. She said, did it get easier? I thought about my brother's phone call. I thought about my mother's kitchen and the cornbread and the drawer where my report cards went. I thought about the scrambled eggs at the all-night diner at 2 a.m, and Hector Villanueva's 400 pages and Dr. Villanueva's 400 pages and Dr. Pagin. Whitfield, who had no patience for people who made numbers complicated on purpose. I said, "It gets clearer. That's better than easier." She nodded like that meant something to her. I think it did. I walked back to my car in the parking garage and I sat for a moment before starting the engine. The city was ordinary around me. Afternoon traffic, someone's music through a cracked window 2 floors up, the smell of rain coming in off the west. I had a filing due Thursday, a new client intake on Friday, a call with Simone about a case we were thinking about taking on, a wage theft situation, restaurant workers, Eastern Cobb County. Not a big number. Important work. I started the car. I had somewhere to be. I used to think that being unseen by the people who are supposed to know you best was the loneliest thing in the world. Sitting in my parents' kitchen while my mother reheated leftovers, and my brother talked about his truck after 14 months of work that had changed the material reality of 43 families, I understood something I hadn't quite been able to name before. The loneliness wasn't the problem. The loneliness was the symptom. The actual disease was the belief, buried deep and never fully examined, that their silence meant something true about my value. It doesn't. It never did. What I've come to understand is that the life you build through honest, rigorous effort has its own accounting system. One that doesn't care who's watching. Hector called me because Dwight trusted me. Dwight trusted me because I had done the right thing on a case that didn't pay well, and didn't make headlines, and didn't impress anyone at Sunday dinner. One act of integrity, unremarked upon, eventually became the thread that pulled 43 families back from the edge of losing everything. That's how it actually works. Not in flashes of recognition, but in the slow, compounding interest of doing things the right way when nobody's keeping score. I think about the version of myself that almost didn't pick up Hector's call. She was tired. She had a brief due. She'd been told in 100 small ways over a lifetime that her judgment about what was worth her time was probably off. I'm glad she picked up anyway. Not because it led to a settlement or a luncheon or a moment of quiet pride in a parking garage, but because picking up was the right thing to do and she knew it and she did it. That's the only foundation that holds. Everything else is weather. My brother asking for help was not a moment of triumph for me. I want to be clear about that. When he said I should have paid more attention to what you do, those words landed somewhere real. And I felt them. And I also knew that what mattered wasn't whether he finally saw me. What mattered was that I'd never stop doing the work whether he saw me or not. The grit it takes to sit at a desk at 2 a.m, alone, rebuilding a legal theory for the third time, that's not built from other people's approval. It's built from something quieter and sturdier, the conviction that the work is real, that the people depending on you are real, that showing up fully is its own kind of answer to every voice that ever said you weren't enough. The young woman I met at Emory asked if it gets easier. I told her it gets clearer. I meant that the noise, the comparisons, the dinners, the drawer where your report cards go, gradually loses its authority over you. Not because you stop caring about the people who make it, but because you stop outsourcing your sense of direction to them. You find out what you actually believe, what you're actually capable of, and you build your life inside that knowledge instead of around their approval of it. That's the work underneath the work, and it never really ends, but it's worth it. Every hour of it.